This is part 2, SketchUp model, yesterday's class, 10 October 2019. I'm going to go to the isometric view that we set up, where the roof and the trusses overhead are hidden from view so that we can work on the reflected ceiling. And I'm going to turn off the layer work we did with these lights and created from scratch. So there's an array of lights on a layer called ceiling system. Could give it a more meaningful name. For now, that's what that is. So let's talk about how we create that. We use the SketchUp grid tool. To create a grid that is going to cover the space. So we're simplifying, obviously. We know the overall length and width of the model. It's about 80 feet in that direction and 45 feet the other way. So I could create that outline, the overall shape. I'm going to create 80 by 50. So 80 feet, comma, 50 feet. So there's the outline of the shape of the grid. Now I'm going to draw the grid itself. Tools, grid. The grid is prompting me for spacing. I'm going to set the spacing at 2 feet at 2 foot centers and draw beginning from here to there to set the depth of it, and then drag across the object, just snap to the endpoint. So that creates a group. And that group is a set of guides, really, that's constrained to that shape. Right? I could set properties to that group because through component attributes, because that will set properties for a group or a component. So if I click on component attributes, to this group I want to add a z coordinate. What's that? That very simply, that's its elevation. If I want this to be 10 feet, I could type 10 feet, and that raises that grid 10 feet into the air. Right? I'm going to create a layer for it. Now I'm doing all this staging outside of the model so that we understand. So all I've done is create an organizational grid. I've raised it 10 feet into the air. It's outside of the model right now, but that's okay. So let's call this, let's create a layer. Ceiling and ambient lights. Enscape. We're going to do V-Ray in a separate episode. And let's take this group and move it to that layer. Ceiling and ambient lights. Enscape. We no longer need this object below, but we'll leave it there for now. So this is a very important step. You have to make certain that when you're placing lights, you're modifying the group or component itself. So I want to double click that, and this is where I'm going to place my lighting array. We're a little tricky. Enscape objects reveals the light types available. Let's see how the disk works. The spots are a little tricky to place, but we'll try both. Disk, and let's start here. On blue axis, that makes sense. That would point it back up at the ceiling, wouldn't it? Let's see what that does. Remember, okay. You can always invert it. So there we have a disk light. And I'm going to array that 6 feet in both directions. You do that with a move copy tool. So you don't have to click on the object itself. It's easier to sort of start at the grid, right? Tap the control key to make a copy. Type in the interval, which would be 6 feet, enter. And then the number of it, which would be, let's see, 80 feet, so 80 divided by 15 times 15x. What did that do? Did that get us to the other end? A little bit beyond. 13x, 12x. There we go. So we have our first set of puck lights, disk lights. Let's select them all. Notice I'm still modifying the group. Hold the control key to get that last one. Now we're going to use move copy in the other direction. Tap the control key. 6 feet. In this direction, 8 times 8x. No, 7x. Okay. I think we're done with that. Now we're going to place this over to the model. I'm just going to move it first along the red axis, the y-axis, right? So it intersects the model. Then we're going to move it along the y-axis, the green axis. Right? So there's our array of lights, and I can set the height, the Z attribute of this group, to anything I want. Right now it's at 10 feet. Okay, there are a bunch of straight lights that exceed somehow beyond the model there. So now I'm going to refine this array. Maybe move it a little north. A little. You see how it's overlapping the wall there. So I'm going to move it along the green axis slightly. Let's lock that axis in place. That should do it. Okay. So now I'm going to double click that group and start removing the stray lights. Select them one by one with the Control key. I'm going to save this model in a folder with today's date in my handouts as usual, so that you can enjoy it in your spare time. Let's delete those lights. I'm going to remove any of these that appear as though they're going to be embedded in the wall, so they don't introduce strange problems. It's a lot of lights. But because we understand the intervals at which they're placed, we have complete control over them, right? So I select that light, and we see the default luminous power is 1000 lumens. Right? We can modulate those properties. So now I'm going to go back to the perspective. I think it was this one, east-west. Okay, and you can see our round lights. You can also see the previous ceiling system, and I'm going to turn off the visibility of the previous ceiling system, which was those spotlights that we closed. So close the group, and we can start Enscape. And see the result that we have so far. Now I think those disc lights may be pointing up. Did I start it? Started. Here's the Enscape window. And I think we're right because we can see vestige of those lights against the wall. So here's where modulating the properties, let me make these windows small so I can tile them. Let's Photoshop. So the Enscape disk light here is close component attributes. I'm selecting that group, so I can select one of the lights. So I'm going to increase the luminosity. You see what's going on with those. You can also modulate the light source, the radius, and make it tight and more diffuse. You can also navigate the model in real time. You see what's going on in different parts of the model. Right? there are my lights. We can pan by holding the shift key and the mouse wheel. It allows us to pan downwards. So my ceiling system is at 10 feet. I could set a different height for it by selecting it. And in component attributes, just set the Z value. If I wanted it at 16 feet, I could type in a value of 16 feet. SketchUp automatically converts that to inches. So this is a way of creating an ambient light. This is all 100% indirect, right? It's all pointing up. But that's not going to be your only source of lights. This is one way to create an ambient array of light. We can do things like modulate the or invert the direction that these are pointing. I could take that ceiling system, right click and say flip along the blue axis, and that sort of makes all those lights point down. Of course, I could copy those and array. I could copy those and create separate layers. So one layer might be pointing upwards. We'll call that indirect light, and this layer would be pointing downwards, direct light. If I go back to the saved view, well, it's going to, we'll go back to the save view. It's going to turn back on the previously saved ceiling system, so be aware of that. So we'll have both lights in this west view, because I've added a layer of lights. Double click, and let's set Enscape to reproduce the synchronized views, so we have this back. So there's our lighting with a system of disc lights looking down, and also spotlights looking down, which I can modify by turning off the ceiling system layer, which had spotlights. Again, if I want to modulate the intensity of the light itself, I'll change the luminous power here. Bring it back down to create a really soft light. Bring it up. Give it more luminous power, and modulate the radius to make it more or less diffuse or more focused. Thanks for watching. Model will be in a handouts folder entitled Class 10-11-2019.